On behalf of the Sero Project and the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, I just wanted to say that we really value we're really excited about the Network Empowerment Project because we really value the power of networks. And we thought it'd be great to kind of launch the Network Empowerment Project and talk about what a network of people living with HIV could be like. I'm Andy Spieldenner. I'm the chair of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. And Barb Cardell, who's also here, who's going to play kind of co-host, is the vice chair of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about networks as well as what the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus is. So some ground rules. We'd love to use the chat box. We're all able to see you. Hi, Tara. Hi, Larry. Hey, Chip. So go ahead and feel free to use the chat box. There's actually several of us on the that have access to be able to respond to you, including Devin Hersey, Ken Pinkela, Tammy Hott, and Cindy Stine, who are all working with either the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus or Sero, and we'll all be able to participate and respond. Raise your hand if you want to be unmuted, and that should be an option that you have. Or just indicate in the chat box. Make sure you send it to everyone. At the end of this, we'll make the PowerPoint available on hivcaucus.org, which is our website. So feel free to go there and check it out. And are there any questions so far? Cool. So we wanted to start kind of around the self-empowerment movement. Where did it start? And in the beginning, there's a process called there was a document called the Denver Principles that emerged in 1983. And what was important about the Denver Principles, and remember, in 1983, we knew very little about the epidemic. We knew very little about what HIV would turn into. In fact, it wasn't even called HIV back then. It was still AIDS. And luckily, it was no longer GRID. So, our knowledge about the disease was very early on. And around 12 people at the Gay and Lesbian Health Conference in 1983 came together as a PWA manifesto and launched the Denver Principles. And it was called the Denver Principles because it was made in Denver. And anyone who's ever been to Colorado can probably attest that Denver is kind of a cool place for stuff like this to happen. Shameless plug. Anyways, so the Denver Principles were important because it identified that the HIV epidemic would be as much about language and politics as it was about health. And it starts out with the phrase, "We condemn attempts to label us as victims," a term that implies defeat, "and we are only occasionally patients," a term that implies passivity, helplessness, and dependence upon the care of others. We are people with AIDS. So even then, you see that there's a recognition that language is going to be a key political area for us to fight on. And we've seen in our lifetimes how language around HIV has really affected how people treat us as people living with HIV. But the Denver Principles did more than that. The Denver Principles were actually, it's only a 2-page document. It's available on our website. And it really talks about our rights and responsibilities as people living with HIV, both as members of a community, as people who receive health services, but also as people that have rights around desire and around health. So some of the ways in which we do that, the Denver Principles cites that people living with HIV should form our own caucuses, to choose our own representatives, to deal with the media, to choose our own agenda, and to plan our own strategies. Also, it encourages us to be involved at every level of decision-making and specifically serve on the boards of directors of provider organizations. So, as you can see in the chat box, Barb is making some documents available for you to look at. Just wanted to address that. What made the Denver Principles so important was that it was the first time that people that shared a disease organized to get a collective voice around our rights. So really in 1983, you had this moment where people were like, hey, we all have the same disease, let's fight. We have something in common. And we've seen this happen in other health conditions. At this point, we've seen how that kind of organizing principle has happened. There's the pink ribbon movement around breast cancer as another example of it. But more and more we see people be able to organize online or in person around disease and health conditions. So, another key impact of the Denver Principles was to really get AIDS service organizations and kind of healthcare in general to acknowledge that we as people living with HIV are the subject matter experts, that we know how the disease is affecting us. We know what we're not able to do and what we can do. And we can talk about these, that we have expert knowledge. And how this affected the way that we built organizations in HIV. So many of the organizations that we're familiar with, the large ones that have been around since the beginning of the epidemic, were actually started by people living with HIV. And our voices as people living with HIV were really important in the way that organizations were framed, in the way that services were provided, in the way that advocacy decisions were made. And that lasted till around the mid 90s when effective therapy, antiretroviral therapy was made available. We started to see the shift between our kind of critical voice, and our voice is kind of integral to these organizations, to us being really listed as consumers and kind of passive recipients of services. So a lot of organizations started moving away from kind of centralizing our voice, either by reducing us to a community advisory board, or there'd be one member of the board of directors openly living with HIV, or maybe one person on staff, instead of having a full, robust, diverse range of people living with HIV involved in the organizations. So we actually start to see in the 2000s how many of these HIV organizations have actually stopped calling themselves HIV organizations. They've reset their missions. They've taken HIV out of their names. And often this isn't because they had mission success. It's because their mission changed. So it's not that they ended the epidemic. It's that their mission focused away from our needs as central. And so for a while, the PLHIV voice was contingent on a few organizations that really tried to represent. And we'll talk more about what happened to those organizations. In the last 4 years, what we've seen is that there's been an increase in criminalization cases across the country. There's a marked increase in stigma across all of our communities. And we've seen that we need to kind of organize as PLHIV again. So one of the ways that we can do that is through networks. And this webinar is all about the Network Empowerment Project and the caucus. And I really want us to think about why networks are important. So, some of the ways in which they've been important is that when you work with other people living with HIV, we get to define our own agenda, determine our priorities. We can develop and identify leaders that we choose, and we're able to, have a collective PLHIV voice. There's nothing more powerful than being able to say, I'm not just speaking for me, I'm speaking for 20 other people living with HIV when I say this. And I think it's important because oftentimes we see that the PLHIV voice in organizations is tokenistic, that there's one person that they talk to, and that person is supposed to represent all of us, and they really don't. And with networks, we're able to work together and kind of develop a shared agenda.
Great. So I'll take it over from here. This is Barb Cardell, and I am the U.S. HIV Caucus Vice Chair. And I am going to talk a little bit about the meaningful involvement of people with HIV and AIDS, which we often talk about as MIPA. And I'm posting a document first, which is the most recent UNAIDS document on GPA. It's from 2007. And so if you would like to find a source document when you go in and you talk to people about why people living with HIV should be a part of every decision that impacts us, you will have this to take in, as well as the most recent National HIV/AIDS strategy, which references positive leadership and speaks to the advances that we have made that have only been possible because of the engagement of persistent advocates. And we have a number of those persistent advocates on the phone, and I think that we harken back to the real important fact that we are the subject matter on our lives. We know more what people living with HIV need and require, more so than any government official or the ASO in particular. So we need to hang on to our the importance of our involvement and know that it has a far-reaching history. The UNAIDS document is actually originally from 1996 and it was updated in 2007, and that is what has been posted. So MIPA is the meaningful involvement of people with HIV and AIDS, and JIPA is the greater involvement of people with HIV and AIDS. And as we can see from the definition with the global network of people living with HIV and the JIPA report card, it means that people are involved in all levels of decision making, whether it is program, whether it is policy, whether it is budgeting decisions, that we have not just an advisory capacity, but that we help shape the programs that are going to impact our lives, and that we are able to vote and to have a meaningful voice. So JIPA is often what it's called in Europe, and actually throughout the rest of the world, but in the United States we seem to have settled on MIPA at this present time, and we put the emphasis on the meaningful involvement of people with HIV and AIDS, because as we go to the next slide we talk about what is meaningful. You know, is it meaningful if we are present but we don't have a vote? If we are that chair, that non-voting chair, I don't believe that that is meaningful, and I have been in those seats. Is it meaningful if we get information that we don't have time to process, where we show up at a meeting and there's information being handed out and everybody else seems to have had days to review it and to come up with an opinion, and we're just seeing it for the first time? And it could be that it's a matter of access, that we don't have access to a computer and everybody else does, but we need to demand that if we are to be meaningfully involved, that we are able to have the information and have time to process it so we're informed. Is it meaningful if we're asked to be a part of meetings where we aren't part of setting the agenda? Absolutely not. As Wahida Shabazel, who with PWN USA, who is a community organizer, says, you need to have a meeting before the meeting. And if you're not a part of that meeting before the meeting where the agenda is set and where goals are set and outcomes are at least outlined, you are not part of being meaningfully involved. And we all know that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And part of this webinar today is about taking back the power of people living with HIV. These decisions impact our lives, and they impact the lives of our brothers and sisters. And so while it has been easy for us to take a step back and re-engage in life for those of us who are doing well and are healthy, it is time for us to re-engage because we are really at a critical turning point where the voices of people living with HIV are more important. Is it meaningful if we pretend to speak for whole groups when we attend a meeting as an individual? That's not true. So if I stand up and I say, well, all people living with HIV need this, when I'm really there representing what I need to be strong enough to identify that this is what I need, this is my individual concern, and if I have information about what the group needs, whether it supports it or not, I should also bring that forward to give my voice validity, to show that I'm not just representing myself, but that I also have broader connections to the community. It's not meaningful if we don't allow other people living with HIV space at the table. We need to ensure that not only are we there, but that our brothers and sisters who might represent other constituencies, whether it is based on any sort of other demographic or perceived difference, that they are there as well. Because if we're at the table, we can make space for others, and that is about ensuring that when we step back, that others are there ready to take on the leadership. If we do not attend the meeting that we're invited to for input, and we don't ask, if we can't attend the meeting, we need to make sure there are people there for us. Because if we're not there representing the voices of people living with HIV, it's not in the room, and that is important. And it is important if we don't stand up for other people living with HIV when their needs or even identities are not discussed. And I apologize for reading this list. I hate it when people on webinars do that. But I think it's important because so often we feel that if we're in the room or if there's a person living with HIV in the room, that is sufficient, and it often isn't. But we do, if we are that one person in the room, have a responsibility to say, I am not the subject matter expert on women of trans experience. However, I know that the policies that you're creating about housing, which is gender specific, would make them feel isolated. And that is a conversation I have had. And then I have asked for the next meeting to have women of trans experience to be on the agenda. So we don't have to be the expert at everything, but we do need to broaden our perspective and know that we don't represent all populations. So what is MEPA? At its most basic, it's really two things, which is recognizing the important contribution that we have and creating space for our involvement and our participation. And this goes back to UNAIDS 1999. And you can see from this group of individuals who are pulled together by Pause Magazine, which is the article that Andy went ahead and posted in the comments section. We've got Tammy, we've got Reed, we've got Robert, Laurel, Andy, Dolores, and I believe who's that on the end? Is that Kenyon? I believe that's Kenyon Farrow who is on the end. So anyhow, these are the subject matter experts currently for our MEPA, and they met and paused an article on them, and they took this very wonderful picture of everybody. So that's a table that is full of the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS, and we need to strive really to continue that. So for the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, we are a network of networks, and we're going to talk a little bit about our history and current activities. But before we talk about the caucus, we always like to frame why we feel we have these rights to form and to be present and to represent ourselves. And it goes back to the Denver Principles, and it goes back to the UN document. So these are old and historic documents that we need to make sure that we reference and that we use to ensure our seats at the table. One of those ways we currently do it is the United States People Living with HIV Caucus, which is a network of networks and advocates. And we have come together really to ensure that when NAPWA dissolved, that there was a national voice for people living with HIV in the United States. And we've been formed since 2010. And we are an informal collaboration. We came together as a number of organizations and individuals who felt that the people living with HIV in the United States needed to have a unified and amplified voice on policy, on programming, and on budget, and especially in 2010, upon the release of the National HIV/AIDS Strategy, that we needed to have a unified response for what was not in that document and needed to be. We also have organized on leadership development, HIV criminalization reform, stigma, and really social justice issues. As anything impacts people living with HIV that we feel we speak best on, the caucus has taken a voice and a leadership role in. And just recently, the caucus was part of a group that offered to meet with both of the candidates for President of the United States, and was able to ensure that HIV was at the very least part of the conversation, and in some cases was a part of the platform of the party. And we recognize the importance of people living with HIV establishing our own agenda and the priorities. And so again, it is about our collective voice, and it is about us speaking for ourselves and coming together. And the voices of people living with HIV are important because, again, it goes back to the nothing about us without us. And that harkens back to the Denver Principles. And we know that if we are separate, that it is very easy for people to pick us off one by one, to diminish us and to silence our voices. But when we have a collective voice, it is essential. It not only is amplified, but we also can lend a variety of perspectives on understanding the epidemic and how to address it. And again, we have our unique perspective. However, when we are tokenized, we suffer. And we all have been part of programs where it sounds like a wonderful idea on paper, but we can look at it and we can know that no person living with HIV was consulted in the design process, because it is either stigmatizing or it expects that we are going to be willing to leave some of our comfort zone without preparation. And so that we know those programs are not going to succeed, and we can pretty much identify that they're not going to succeed before they ever get funded. And unfortunately, we're not often part of those consultations. However, the caucus is working to make that the case and make that more regular. And we will see how we do with the new administration as we continue. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to my co-presenter, Devin.
Thank you, Barb. All right, so the last two presenters really put a lot of the things I'm about to give you into perspective. I'll be speaking on our actions. So first, we are deliberately constituent-driven and inclusive. That's really represented in the makeup of our steering committee. Our governance document is listed on the website. And, this kind of is also reflected in our desire to connect with networks of people living with HIV locally and nationally. We engage with partner organizations based on the needs of our members. Our members include 4 national networks of people living with HIV, as well as local and regional networks. And our steering committee is purposefully diverse and representative of the HIV epidemic in terms of identities and constituencies as well as regions. All right, so our NEPA activities. The HIV Caucus has worked with AIDS United on 2 initiatives to increase NEPA. So the first one is the Positive Organizing Project, so a project that I worked on this past year. So it's now in its 3rd year of funding. And the project reduces stigma and increases people living with HIV empowerment in local areas. And really what it is it's a funded project that allows a community, an organization within the community to really address the involvement of people.
Looks like we might have had some problems with Devin falling off of the phone, so I will jump in.
Oh, I can. You want me to?
Please.
Okay. So Devin was talking about the Positive Organizing Project, and these are projects that are funded for 1 year. All of us have worked with organizations all over the country that have been part of POP, and these organizations have done amazing work. Kind of. Oh, we're on AIDS Watch. So, doing amazing work in these areas around MIPA, reducing stigma, and empowering people living with HIV. We also have worked with, we're a planning partner. The HIV Caucus is a planning partner on AIDS Watch, and I don't know how many people know what AIDS Watch is. I kind of knew about it for a long time, and then when I started getting involved with it as part of the HIV Caucus, I've been really shocked at kind of how large we've been able to get it. So, it's the largest national HIV legislative day in Washington, D.C. So last year, 400 people came from all over the country to meet with legislators on the importance of HIV in their region. And sometimes they talk about criminalization, sometimes they talk about Ryan White, sometimes they talk about poverty and other social determinants, sometimes we talk about syringe access. But these are basically, we really want to help people find their voice of what they feel needs to happen in their local communities in this process. So this next year, AIDS Watch will be March 27th through the 28th on 2017. You can see the website there to get more information. And I want to really stress that scholarships are available. We have scholarships. The scholarship application is due by October 31st, 2016. So if you're thinking of going, get your scholarship in. If you've already been, get somebody else to go to think about going. This is a great opportunity for you to gain experience on the Hill, to be able to get your voice heard, and to meet other people living with HIV doing similar kinds of work. So it's exciting. and I look forward to seeing you all there. So we also wanted to talk about how to get involved with the HIV Caucus directly.
All right, thanks, Andy and Barb and Devin. I will take over. This is Tammy Hott. I am the co-secretary for the USPL HIV Caucus and co-chair of the membership committee. So just a little bit more to get everyone involved. The membership of the caucus participates in setting strategic priorities and agenda for the caucus, serves as advisors to the caucus steering committee, and helps communicate the work of the caucus to the broader community of people living with HIV. And the membership is comprised of institutions, which are organizations, coalitions, networks or client groups of people living with HIV, and independent advocates who agree to actively engage in the day-to-day work of the caucus by serving on the steering committee or in one of the 3 working groups. All representatives of institutions as well as independent advocate members must be individuals living with HIV. So to be a member, the caucus membership is reserved for people living with HIV. And so this is our organizational chart. Barb did a great job with all of the arrows connecting everything together. So we start with the overall community, including allies of people living with HIV, which leads to the caucus membership, which, as I just said, are people living with HIV, who we strongly encourage to join one of the working groups. And the 3 working groups we currently have is a policy working group, communications, and membership. And the working groups help, as we said, lead the agenda for the caucus steering committee, which leads to the caucus leadership team. And the leadership team is the steering committee officers and members of the committee chairs and ad hoc working groups. And then the caucus executive committee, which consists of the caucus officers. And through all of this process, our goal is to amplify the voices of everyone who is living with HIV. So for institutional members, these are organizations, coalitions, and networks and client groups that represent a minimum of 10 individuals who self-identify as openly living with HIV, and they are all eligible to join the caucus if they satisfy the following criteria. So they must have their own bylaws or memorandum of understanding. The bylaws or MOU require a majority of 50% of the board directors of people living with HIV. Do not need to be formally incorporated. You just need to be autonomous and independent in your governance. So if it's a CAB, your people living with HIV have the leadership and the control of the agenda and things that you're doing. And everyone must be, the chairperson or CEO must be a person living with HIV. The advocacy by, which is always critical, it's by and for people living with HIV, and advocacy must be a primary consideration or a primary focus of their mission. Have a track record of at least 1 year of involvement, and the institution can designate one person to represent them on the caucus. Then we have the independent advocates, and these are people openly living with HIV. We have our wonderful representatives that are pictured from Colorado and focusing on the work that they just did, advocating for themselves and everyone living with HIV in Colorado to modernize their HIV legislation and their criminalization laws. So these are very powerful advocates pictured here. And so people living with openly living with HIV who advocate for people living with HIV and demonstrate an ability to work collaboratively with networks of people living with HIV and other individual advocates and activists may become members of the caucus if they meet the following criteria. 1, they have demonstrated involvement in advocacy for people living with HIV. And then we're asking you send a letter to the caucus membership committee nominating themselves to join and committing to actively participate. So I have set up an email account, and it is caucus membership, so that's CAUCUSMembership@gmail.com. And then the caucus membership committee will read through that and then contact you as you become an independent advocate. So we realize everyone is at a different stage of being an advocate, and not everyone has had the opportunity to or the experience, or you may not feel as experienced being an advocate as others, but still want to have an opportunity to become engaged and involved. So we want you to send us that letter with just describing your experiences to date of the advocacy that you have done. And it doesn't necessarily have to be legislative advocacy. It can include advocacy within your local ASO or on a CAB, Consumer Advisory Board, or something like that, along with letting us know which of the 3 committees you would like to work on, either the membership, the policy, or the communication. Barb, did I forget anything in there? Is there anything else you'd like to add to what we are looking for in the letter to the membership committee?
Just, I would say that if people go to the website, they can see the governance document, which outlines these details. And Chip has brought up a great point, which is asking about allies. Currently, that is not a group that we have often had people interested in joining the caucus, and so it's something that we will explore further about how we can involve allies in the caucus. So I would say if you have more questions, go to the website, but if you would like a synopsis of what the caucus is, go ahead and send us an email, and we will send it to you as soon as possible. I think other than that, you got everything. Just to highlight that the reason why we're doing this webinar is to talk about networks and how we can empower networks, which will be coming up next, but also to really encourage people to apply to caucus membership because the USPL HIV Caucus is really working to be one of the voices of people living with HIV in that unified fashion. So thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, Barb. And so on this slide, it shows, somebody else have a comment? Okay. So we have where the website. Okay, so that was interesting. And then if you have any questions about membership, please email Barb or I, and our emails are here, and we are more than welcome to answer any questions that you have. All right, so now I am going to change the webinar.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So I've done this because we are going to add in Cindy, Stine, and Ken Pinkela from the Sero project, but somehow we've had technical difficulties today. I need to. Oh, yes, we can hear you now.
Great. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you okay.
Great. Thanks,
Hello,
Tammy.
can you hear me?
So if you are not speaking, if you could put your phone,
Hi, Tammy, can you hear us?
the speakers on mute, so that we don't have any background noise. We would appreciate that.
Great.
Tammy, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Tammy.
Thank you.
So we just wanted to, this is Cindy Stine and Ken Pinkela. We're in Milford, Pennsylvania at Sero. And sorry for the difficulties we had up front, and thank you for everybody that jumped in and got this going. Cindy and I'd like to run through the Network Empowerment Project. And Tammy, can you go to the next slide, please? So not to read the slide and just the background, this has been a long lifetime vision that Sean Strub has had on how to reach out and bring together the people living with HIV and the networks that exist and the small individuals and organizations that want to start their own network. So you can see from, this is actually Sean's vision that he was able to update for us, but specifically in 2017, because we want to look ahead. NEP is alive and well. We're in our production development mode. And what we are putting out there, that our mission for 2017 is to conduct the workshops and build those linkages really with existing and new networks of people living with HIV. And then we hope to, as we develop in our strategic plan, to reach out both with not just the workshops, but regional training, webinars to take advantage of sharing what NEP's vision truly is. Can you go to the next slide? So this was just a fun slide that we wanted to show folks that from 2014, 2015, and then ultimately in 2016, the people that we reached out with in cross-section, we actually put those dots out there from where people came from that participated in the development, in our vision, in the editing teams. So this is a nice shout out to everybody that took part of it, and a nice visual that we wanted to put together to show people that we truly have reached out across the country in the big network of people living with HIV to help put together our concept. So thank you to everyone there, and thank you to everyone else that did participate and help in the background too. Next slide. So site architecture. NEP, as the Network Empowerment Project, is going to be its own website, resident through the Sero Project website. And this is how we envision it. If you can imagine, these are the drop downs and the links and the buttons on any given website. It's going to be interactive in what I call clean, nice and easy. Of course, the standard pieces about what is NEP, an introduction and background for any organizational structure, and that will be a living document and grow about what is NEP and its background historically. But specifically, those 4 links or buttons that you see to the right-hand side of the screen: the Toolkit, the Knowledge Bank, the Expertise Bank, and then something we're very proud of is the inclusion and growth of our our existing state networks, and hopefully we will cover all of the states and have all the states included.
Yeah, for the calendar, what we envision for the calendar is that eventually have each state be able to input or upload their events that are pertaining to their state. But we're going to be putting events such as AIDS United, AIDS Watch, so that anybody could go in and the calendar will be have across the country and as far as other events that are happening. But eventually our goal is to have people able to upload their own events within their own states.
As most of you, at least on this call, to include some of the new folks that we heard that were on the call, and some of the, when I say older, I mean older, been doing the work for a long time, we really kind of haven't seen that central location where those big muscle moves of HIV-related events are seen and actually synchronized. So we are dedicating ourselves to make sure we include that all-encompassing and what I call that kind of like synchronization calendar but it's going to be live. We're going to have the input from, existing organizations, and like Cindy said, a lot from our state advocates and those existing state networks, so that we can see what each other are doing. Both with the synchronization, we don't want to step on each other's toes. I know recently, just from my own personal piece, we saw issues around USCA and the timing of other large events, the positive living conferences. So we're kind of hopefully going to fill that niche to be that central calendar of ongoing HIV-related events. And that was really one of the major focuses we heard from people on everything. No one knew what everybody else was doing. Everybody's sharing their calendars on their phones. So we're gonna step up and put that as central.
Right, allow people to know what their resources are and how to connect.
Exactly. So that was just kind of give you a visual that as we build our site architecture, what it'll look like. It'll be pretty, but nice and clean. What we see in the Toolkit bank is literally those resources that have been developed for new organizations. And Tammy, if you go to the next slide. This is how we kind of envision those three banks. We had fun when we built this. Actually, those little guys are animated, and we'll send out these slides. You can see it because we're very proud of our animation. But the Toolkit, you can see, how to start a fundraising event, how to start building supportive groups, the network itself, what is it, what could it be, what is an effective network, how to do membership recruiting, building external alliances, and then any related videos that we hope everybody has said they're kind of dedicated to, we can start putting those there. So you can see the Toolkit really is the how to start a network resource. What's different over when you come into knowledge, this is where we're going to link. We're going to drop in anything related to existing knowledge. And these were just examples that we wanted to show, anything that's out there right now, authoritative on HIV and PrEP, access to care. And if you could imagine that linkage back to each state, legal issues, policy issues, the stigma related issues, and, both academic, pieces, scholarly, articles, blogs, anything related, how-to guides, something we're very proud of that Cindy pulls together and a lot of organizations rely on, bill tracking as it relates to HIV, both funding, HIV stigma, HIV criminalization at the state level and federal levels, the related videos, and then a big piece down there is that database. And it really is plural, the databases of existing networks that we want to include and be what I have always called the central warehouse of information. What schools have maybe educational classes, which medical facilities, what legal resources, and to start, and by the way, contacts amongst the existing networks. We're really excited about that. Cindy has an incredible amount of already existing databases, and now we're going to have some place to put them and share them. And then what's different over on that expertise side? These really are guidelines, guidance, resource pieces from experts. And those people are not degreed experts. They could be those advocates that have been doing grassroots efforts, and you can see the topics related to public policy, sex work, the military, people of color, housing issues, transgender issues, immigration. We all know who some of those experts are, and now we want to give them someplace where they can be seen, they can drop their information, they can share their information, and then ultimately that beauty is that anybody can reach out and get it. We're really excited as we were changing those words, how people could see, share, grow a network, and existing networks can also grow and share both their knowledge and then their individual expertise. The next slide. So this was the concept. And again, that we were really proud of our animation, but Anytime Meeting gave us a little hard time. So we're going to share this so you can see it. It was fun. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the little person out there. They have a question. Well, that question they can ask the network. They can ask the network both in that toolkit, the knowledge or the expertise banks. And then we're so proud of is that we are a community, and the community is going to come together and put those pieces of the puzzle to help answer that. And we truly see that as that family, that network reply. And I really wish you could see the animation, because the guy over on the right-hand side, or person on the right-hand side, he gets or she gets a network-empowered answer or a lead. We're not going to leave you hanging. Someone out there within the knowledge or individual expertise or organizational expertise, we're going to get you something. We're going to steer you the right direction. We're going to get you to that next lead. And that really was our visual concept of what we see NEP as. Next slide. And I think Andy, Barb, and everybody, this is where we were going to kind of go off if there's any other questions, both either at NEP or I believe maybe for the end of the webinar. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And Cindy, that was great. Really appreciate you guys doing all this. I can see there's a lot of excitement in the chat box. Do people have questions for us? Do you want further clarification? Anything? *6 to unmute, folks. Well, waiting to hear about questions. Well, Chip is asking what would be the best way to share this with everyone I know who's living with HIV. We'll have the recorded PowerPoint, the PowerPoint up, and the recording will be available. The PowerPoint will be up sooner because I can do that. We have our contact information up right there. If you want to get in touch with any of us, that's our contact information. And if you go to hivcaucus.org, we'll have the slides up for this PowerPoint. And you can download those, hopefully, and get those, or just email us directly and we can send you a copy. Sasha's asking, when can we expect this to be ready for sending out? We can send out the PowerPoints. If you email me or anybody up there, we can send you a copy of the PowerPoint directly. In terms of the Network Empowerment Project, Ken, when is the website going to go live?
Yeah.
Sorry, we had to unmute.
Yeah. We're looking at towards the end of November.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So
we're very excited.
Yay. So Barbara Locke asks, when we are attempting to broaden our network statewide, what kind of support can we expect? It's another question for Ken and Cindy.
Statewide, what type of support can we expect?
So this is from Barbara Locke. Hi, Barbara.
Hey, Barbara.
So what type of support can we expect? What's going to be so powerful is going to be that database of the existing networks. That probably is going to be your biggest and best ally out of NEP, because there's going to be people from, let's just say, from the States or from PWN or from Sero. You're going to have a contact. Some people are probably going to offer a phone, if not always an email address, where then you can, of course, link up. But what I'm sitting here, Cindy and I are looking at each other, that's another good question for us to include in some of our first webinars as NEP does go live and we're out there on the network.
Great. Any other questions that people have? So, thank you all for coming. Is there any last remarks from people, or should we?
We're going to have a webinar.
So thank you
Sure,
all
this
for
is
coming.
Barb.
Go ahead.
Sorry, was talking on mute. So, yes, always my most profound when I'm on mute. So this is Barb, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us and really encourage you, if you have any further questions about the caucus, please go ahead and give us an email, and we will have more information that we can go ahead and share. And one slide that I am realizing that we did not put up is that the caucus has ex officio member organizations, and so we are not just looking for new independent advocates as well as institutions. We already have 4 institutions that have been partnered with the caucus since our creation, and those those institutions are GMP Plus North America, the Sero Project, Positive Women's Network USA, as well as ICW North America. And so if you have been getting some caucus information through one of those other organizations, it is because we come together again with that express intent of amplifying the voice of all people living with HIV in the United States, and they have been partners since the beginning.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. So really appreciate everyone's time for spending Wednesday afternoon with us. Feel free to contact us with any questions, concerns, requests for the PowerPoints, or anything you want. And we'd love to hear from you. Anything else?
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.